The thing is, I've got in front of me here Home Office figures, and they're saying 7,300 foreign criminals, and this is a record number apparently, are living in freedom in the UK instead of being deported. How come, my friend?
Well, I suppose the only reassuring thing to say is these are ones that at least they know about. So there's a process which once people have served their sentence, they then have to be deported. Now, it doesn't happen immediately for a couple of reasons. Sometimes they're appealing, and there was a court ruling in 2017 which said you can't deport until after the appeal process has exhausted. Now, it is fair to say for the Home Office, they are deporting roughly about 5,000 a year. The more worrying figure is the 700 or so who have absconded. In other words, these are ones who are due for deportation but have gone off the radar.
Gotcha. So are we saying, paint me a picture here, Donal, are we saying we're talking about killers, we're talking about sex attackers, we're talking about drug dealers? Are they coming here to seek anonymity, asylum, call it what you want, or are they committing those crimes here?
It's a huge mix because the figures just talk about people who are foreign nationals. Now, that could cover someone who's come over a month before offending, but equally it could cover someone who's lived here since they were a child. So it covers a whole range of things. It also covers a whole range of offences because although there is a number who have committed the most serious of offences, the legislation talks about automatic deportation for anyone who's given a prison sentence of 12 months or more. So it can also cover relatively minor offences.
How can any of these people even think about trying to claim asylum if they've
a good lawyer?
Well, is that the case?
Well, the asylum issue is a different issue. You do, of course, have people who are over here claiming asylum and then, whilst claiming asylum, commit an offence. That is, of course, a subcategory. But the majority of these will be people, for example, who are EU nationals or non-EU nationals who have been living here and have committed a crime whilst living here legitimately. So it covers a whole host of different type of things. From looking at the figures, the people who are over here seeking asylum and then committed an offence seems to be a very, very small number compared to the others.
You seem to think, however shocking these numbers appear, the Home Office are on the case here, do you, or is this out of control?
Well, they're on the case in so much as that they're certainly deporting some numbers. But, I mean, the reports previously into this have never made good reading. There was a report in 2017 where the Chief Inspector of Borders was saying that the Home Office was massively understaffed and were losing track of individuals. So although they are deporting several thousand every year, it would certainly it wouldn't be right to say that we should be complacent about this, given that the figures appear to be on the up rather than on going down.
Donal, I would love to know your opinion on this story doing the rounds. This is breaking today. It's about a guy called Mo Chowdhury. He's 28 years of age. He's from Luton. Right. Now, he's a former Uber driver. You know about this, yeah?
Yeah.
Right. Now, here's the first thing, right? This guy planned to target tourist sites like Madame Tussauds, Piccadilly Circus, the London Pride Parade, and he was going to do this with a vehicle and run into people. He had a knife, he had a gun as well. He's fixated in the royal family, and before we even get here, so today he's put away, but before we got to this stage, he was cleared of launching a sword attack on police outside Buckingham Palace, right? He's now been found guilty of plotting these terror attacks. But he was cleared of launching this sword attack, even though you've got video footage which people may see on 24-hour news, and they see the police officer with this massive machete taking it out of his car. I mean, this is where we, as members of the general public, despair. We had a chance to put him away, and we didn't take it.
Well, you say members of the general public despair. It was members of the general public who heard the defence and said, yes, we can't be sure it was a terrorist attack. What his defence was on that first occasion was was quite a narrow one. He was saying, yes, that's me, yes, I was doing it, but it wasn't a terrorist attack. I was, in fact, doing, I suppose, what's the common parlance, suicide by cop. I was trying to get myself killed. That's why I was doing it. And he
so
had
that's okay
two
then.
trials.
You can plead that, and then that's okay. And you say, "Poor you." Well, there you go.
Well,
We'll let you out.
Well, you can't plead it, but effectively, given that what he was being charged with was doing it as an act of terrorism, and he was saying, "No, I wasn't doing an act of terrorism. I was trying to get myself shot." Now, on the first trial, it was a hung jury. The jury couldn't decide on that, and then on the second trial, the jury. And again, we can never go behind and know what a jury's thinking. The jury obviously decided that they couldn't be sure he was planning a terrorist attack. Mm-hmm. Now, I suppose what's reassuring, shall we say, about this, let's put it this way, is that whatever the verdict of the jury, the security services themselves didn't buy it, frankly. And so had him under surveillance from day one of his release after his acquittal. Yeah. And what, in fact, this whole thing for which he's now been convicted was them posing as like-minded individuals and basically getting him to drop the mask, frankly. Yeah. So although the jury process led to people not being sure, tabs were kept on him such that, as I say, the mask fell, and now he's been convicted of something that carries a maximum life sentence.
Jackie, one of the things he was thinking about was launching an attack during the 2-minute silence on Remembrance Day.
Yeah, and I mean, luckily in this instance, they did have tabs on him, so they could keep an eye on him, and he was under suspicion the entire time. What is so worrying is they can't do that with every single suspicious individual who's released from prison, who says they are not radicalised anymore. You just can't possibly keep tabs on everybody.
Well, what was also disturbing about some of the evidence that came forward this time was that he had himself been mocking the so-called, as he said it, de-radicalisation programmes that were currently in prison. And whilst he was on remand for the first matters, the matter for which he was acquitted, he, of course, was with others of a radical nature. So what one's got to, again, as we've been talking about many times, look at what programmes are we making these individuals take in prison, because at some stage they are going to be released, and how do we have effective de-radicalisation programmes, or stop those who are too dangerous from being released before that's happened.
I mean, can they keep tabs on more people than they do?
Well, the numbers, it's always difficult to say what the numbers are. They certainly, of those they believe are high risk, they do keep tabs on, because, for example, we know that the individual who did the attack in Streatham was of course being kept tabs on as well. So it's clear that the intelligence services do certainly have risk assessments and do take the steps where they think it necessary. But of course, you can't keep tabs on everybody. And as we know from the London Bridge attack, individuals can also deceive. People can seem and come across as being rehabilitated when they're not.
Completely competing stories this morning about whether or not this flight has actually left or not. The Home Office certainly said the flight would go ahead, but admitted that the majority of the detainees held at those two detention centres in Heathrow would not be on board.
Yes, I mean, we're hearing both. We're hearing that it's been delayed and that it's taken off. We're still waiting for confirmation either way. We're also not clear exactly how many people were given a reprieve after the Court of Appeal ruling last night. I mean, it's a little bit of chaos as far as the information goes.
How unusual with the Home Office. I mean, that almost never happens.
Indeed. But what's really troubling about that is that yesterday we had 11 comments from ministers saying that due process is followed. Just in hours before the flight takes off, a court says, actually, no, due process hasn't been followed, and there's a number of people on this flight that really shouldn't be on it. It's really difficult to have faith in that process.
Yes, well, indeed. I mean, we know there have been many times when we've proven not to have faith in the Home Office process. Now, there are lots of people who are arguing about this online yesterday, and I know radio stations as well, saying, look, these are people who, they're not British, they don't have British passports, they have come to this country, they have committed some very serious crimes. Okay, I mean, including drugs offences, which not violent crimes, but nevertheless are serious crimes for most of us. And they're no longer welcome here. They are not suspected of crimes. They have been convicted and sentenced, and they're no longer welcome in this country. What do you say to people who think that?
I think it's amazing that we use the British passport as the definition of whether you're British. Because there's millions and millions and millions of British people who've lived here for 20 generations who don't have passports either.
But they would be eligible for a British passport. If they applied for it, they'd get it within a few days.
If you've lived here since you were a child, you are more British than you are foreign. And it's not enough, on the one hand, to say, as the Minister did yesterday, he defines the Windrush generation purely as that nurse that came here and delivered 100 babies. Does that nurse not get the chance to make a mistake? If that nurse gets caught with an ounce of weed in her pocket, do we suddenly disown her? Those are British people in all but name. There is no back for us to send them back to. And if they've gone to jail and they've served their time and they've been rehabilitated, they should get the chance, just like everybody else, to go back to their families, back to their communities and try to be better. You can't punish people twice.
Well, this is it. We're talking about punishing people twice. I think the vast majority of people in this country, and people listening right now, don't have an issue with deporting foreign criminals. If you arrive in this country as an adult and you commit a serious crime, I mean, I don't mean someone, speeding at 43 miles per hour or something. I mean, you commit a serious crime and you go to jail for it. I've got to be honest with you. Bye-bye. I don't care if you're married to someone, you've got kids here. That's not my problem. You should have thought that before you quit the crime. But where I do draw the line is when people have arrived here as a child and have, through no choice of their own, but don't have documentation to say they're British. But because we all know, I mean, lots of people saying, why do these people not have documentation to say they're British? But of course, there's a very long, complicated and very expensive process to do that, isn't there? There
is. It costs thousands of pounds to get that paperwork. And in a lot of those cases, if people came here at the age of 3 or 7, or some of them were actually even born here, they won't know that they're not British. It's only when something goes wrong that you're told that you're not British, and people have gone through life assuming that they are. And it can be quite a shock then to find out that, you've admitted to having made a mistake in your life, you've gone to jail, you've served your time, you come out only to then be told that actually we've discovered that you're not British and we're sending you back to a country you've never lived before. And there have been some concerns, haven't there, from some people that actually they would be subject to violence if they did return to Jamaica. And some certainly one man who's got a number of children here, married to a British woman, and his cousin and another man he knows have both been killed since being deported to Jamaica. Yes, we do get reports of that. I think in the last year, 5 or 6 people, just in the last year alone, have died post-deportation. And part of that, what we know from reports on the ground, part of that is because of the sort of quite ceaseless communication from government, which sort of emphasises again and again, whether it's true or not, that these are all the most serious criminals. They're all the worst type of criminals, the government keeps saying. So when these people land there, you've got gangs and other groups that sort of target them as soon as they hit the ground, so you're putting their lives in danger at the other end. Okay, well, we had the court decision, the Court of Appeal last night, I think about 8 o'clock. And then despite that fact, people were taken out of Harmondsworth and other detention centres on coaches. We understand the Home Office said that legal proceedings were ongoing and they'd asked the Court of Appeal to reconsider the ruling. A ruling overnight from the court. They ruled that the Home Office had lost its appeal in the early hours of this morning, which meant, again, that dozens of people in those 2 Heathrow detention centres would not be removed. A statement from the Home Office in the last hour has said, we make no apology for trying to protect the public from serious, violent and persistent foreign national offenders. The court ruling does not apply to all of the foreign national offenders due to be deported, and we are therefore proceeding with the flight. They said the guidance on those taken off the flight is that the court did not order that these
these foreign national offenders cannot be deported from the UK at a future date. We're just going to be going through, it would appear, more of an appeals process. But Satbir Singh, given that in the wake of the Windrush affair, that there was in the early, the early indications is that the inquiry into that was going to recommend that we don't have this sort of default deportation, and that there may be many thousands more people affected in similar circumstances, particularly children brought here at a very early age. The government seems to be sort of going against the recommendations of its own inquiry.
Well, that wouldn't be the first time they've done that, would it?
This is true.
The Shaw review, which they commissioned into vulnerable people in detention, also made the same recommendation. It said that at a certain point, some people, you just have to admit, are more British than they're foreign. The Windrush Lessons Learned review, that draft that we've now seen in the public domain, seems to say that people who came here under the age of 13, people who haven't really committed serious offences, automatic deportation should be reviewed. But, the government is committed to ignoring evidence that it's commissioned and advice that it's commissioned. And that's what I find most troubling, that we know that in the system there are these problems where they make mistakes, where they wrongly designate people in the wrong categories. If you've got a situation where 8 hours before a flight takes off, a court is saying, hang on, you've not dotted the I's and crossed the T's here. I think these flights just need to be put on hold until they have figured that out.
The government decided, with the help of the Home Office under Priti Patel's watch, that they should be deporting a whole host of criminals, people who had been coming to this country from elsewhere, Jamaica in particular, committing crimes, serving time, and then, as a result of a law brought in by the Labour Party in 2007, deported. Now, you would think there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely straightforward, up and down, black and white case. I'm afraid if you've served time for a serious crime, you can then be deported as a foreign national. Of course, what these lawyers are saying, and they're all lefties, of course, well, they shouldn't be allowed to be deported because they're not really from those countries. Even though they came from those countries, they came when they were very young, and they should be allowed to stay here. Well, we don't really want them, thanks. We've got enough rapists and murderers of our own. Instead of importing them, let's talk to Bobby and find out what he makes of it all. Hi, Bobby.
Hi, Mike.
Very, very controversial case, this, for some people, but it's not very controversial for me when you look at some of the serious crimes that these individuals have committed. It looks as though the flight has gone to Jamaica anyway. It's not clear how many people might have been taken off.
So I think they're saying that about 17 people were on the flight this morning. It was a slightly convoluted ruling that the Court of Appeal gave. What it effectively said, the court, was that where there was doubt about whether some of the people had access to a mobile phone, a working mobile phone, they shouldn't be deported, and that was on the basis that the O2 network apparently wasn't working around the detention centre. O2 network doesn't work in many places, from my experience, and saying that they therefore didn't have access to a lawyer. So that's not saying that they won't be deported in the long run. That's just about working out whether they had the ability to speak to a lawyer, which is probably fair enough. And the bigger question really is about whether these people should be being deported at all. And as you say, at one end of the spectrum, you have people who came here from a foreign country at a relatively significant age and have carried out pretty heinous crimes such as rape. And it's very hard to have any sympathy for these people. And you think, well, if you want to go and rape someone or commit very serious offences. On the other end, and this is where it does get rather more difficult, you have people who came to this country at the age of 2 and therefore don't know anything apart from the UK, would consider themselves completely British. And in one case, for example, there's a man who at the age of 17, so when he was still a child, carried out a drugs offence. Yes, a serious drugs offence, but has since then been rehabilitated, stayed out of trouble, and yet is being sent to a country where he doesn't know anybody and hasn't been there as far as he remembers.
But you know as well as I do, Bobby, that you know as well as I do, Bobby, that people who go to prison for offences, particularly if they're serious offences, have probably committed other offences for which they did not go to prison, because you and I both know it's quite difficult to lock people up for a first offence, no matter how serious it is.
Well, that certainly is right. Obviously, we don't know the individual cases, but you're absolutely right that it's no mean feat to get a prison sentence of 12 months or more, which applies to all of these people. All of them are serious offences. But as I say, I think we as society look at them differently. So don't get me wrong. People who have supplied drugs are people who have failed, and we don't want them generally to be acting like that in society. It's different to people who've committed rape or murder, though.
Well, I think so. I mean, here's the quote from Bella Sankey, right, the Director of Detention Action. She says, "These people are as British as Boris Johnson. That's the truth. They have families and British wives and British children who would be massively detrimentally affected by this." Well, I'll tell you who else is massively detrimentally affected by it. The people that they murdered, the people that they raped, the people that they supplied drugs to. So I'm sorry, I don't take this as any kind of means of defence.
No, and I mean, I agree with you on that, Mike, and certainly in those most serious cases. As I say, I mean, I think it does get more difficult because otherwise the question is, are you punishing somebody twice? And that I can absolutely see both sides of the argument on that, because one of the arguments might be, well, if we as a society think that if you commit a particular drug crime, you should go to prison for 12 months and then you're able to be rehabilitated back into society, then if you then deport someone, that is punishing them a second time. And of course, if someone comes to this country as an adult and commits a crime, then I think it's very simple, because the point is you as an adult have chosen to come here. We don't want you because you've come here and you've abused that. I think it's a little bit different, though, if someone did come here as a 2-year-old and therefore is to all intents and purposes British, but the difference is they happen to have committed a crime.
But they're not British, are they? Because they didn't ever get British citizenship. Rights to remain in this country is not the same thing.
That's absolutely right. But I think, as a matter of reality, if you have been in Britain since the age of 2, put to one side what passport you're holding. If you've grown up in Britain, or your friends are in Britain, your family is in Britain, and you're then sent to a country where you don't know anybody, you have no connections there, you have no place to live, you have no network, I think that is different. That is an additional punishment. Now, of course...
So you're saying that we as a nation have a responsibility to look after anyone that comes here, whether it's legally or illegally, regardless of what kind of behaviour they then decide to behave like, regardless of what crimes they commit. I don't agree.
No, well, I wouldn't agree with that proposition either, Mike. I mean, I think, as I say, at one end of the spectrum, it's very easy, right? The older someone was when they came here and the more serious crime it is, the easier it is. I don't think anybody really has any sympathy, as I say, for someone who is a rapist.
Yeah, but these lawyers, right, these lawyers who are fighting on behalf of these people are making a case that all of them should stay here. They're not saying some of them should, they're saying that they should all stay.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. And ultimately, when someone commits a significantly serious crime, you have to accept that when you are not a citizen of a country, you don't have a right to stay there. And that's why. And it's a Labour government policy, Labour government law that has brought this in. I think that's absolutely right. That when you commit a particularly serious crime, if you're not a citizen of the country, how can you expect them to stay there? It's like going round to somebody's house and then smashing up their house and saying, "Oh, well, I'd like to still carry on staying here." Of course, you wouldn't expect that. You'll be thrown
but that's
out.
exactly what happened in one particular case here. A guy by the name of Lloyd Byfield, right, who's 48 years of age, a Jamaican drug dealer, came to Britain in the year 2000, was meant to then be deported after committing various crimes, and basically convinced the court that he should be allowed to stay here because he had a wife here. He then murdered a woman with a claw hammer in front of her 6-year-old child. He's one of the people being deported. He's one of the people these lefty lawyers think we should be looking after. Well, I don't.
Oh, I know, and that's ridiculous. I mean, that's ridiculous. Absolutely, Mike. You're quite right. On a case like that, it is absolutely ridiculous because. Great, he's got a wife here. Well, in which case, don't kill somebody with a claw hammer.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very simple.
It's not
if you
difficult.
Want to stay here, don't do that. That's absolutely not difficult. What I'm saying is that I think there is, of those people on the flight, there are various extremes, and I personally think that if someone is a 17-year-old child and they commit an offence, which, yes, is a serious mistake, but ultimately, particularly if you're 17 and you've been taken in by gangs and that kind of thing, it's easy to see how somebody can be led astray and how you can put your life right. And if you have lived here since the age of 2, and therefore you don't hold the passport, but you feel and in every other way are British, I personally think that that's the other end of the scale, and I'm not comfortable with that person being deported. But compare that to someone who's come here at an older age, who's committed the kind of crimes you're saying. I really don't think that those are the kinds of people that anybody should be wasting their breath trying to help them, and I certainly wouldn't.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think Priti Patel has got this one right. And I'm sick to death of seeing these kind of legal procedures, which are just that, just procedures, which are only going to delay the inevitable anyway. Bobby, listen, thanks a lot for talking to us. Bobby Friedman, barrister and commentator, of course, on all manner of things. Good friend of this station, good friend of this show, a man that talks a lot of sense. But I don't agree with him on every single point he made today, because I don't believe it makes any difference whether you came here when you were 2, whether you came here when you were 4, whether you came here when you were 24. If you come here from another country and you commit crime, I'm sorry, you can go back to from whence you came. Thank you very much indeed. Cheerio. Good night. This is Talk Radio.
If you've been following the events of the Windrush, of these deportations of Jamaicans on Twitter, you'll have noticed Rolf Harris has been trending all day, because many people are asking why the convicted paedophile and an Australian national hasn't been sent packing yet himself. Is it due to his white privilege, critics are asking? I'll leave that one hanging in the air as well, if I may, while I turn to Minnie Rahmen for a bit of guidance first. She's campaign manager at the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, and she joins us on the line now. Afternoon to you, Minnie.
Hi, Matthew.
It's I'm not quite sure where the moral compass is pointing on this one. On the one hand, these people that are being deported are offenders, but they're being deported to a country that, in many cases, they won't have any recollection of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the really important thing to remember is 2 years ago we had the Windrush scandal,
yes,
which showed exactly how the hostile environment was leading to the wrongful detention and deportation of British people and people who'd been in the country since they were children. The government promised to learn the lessons from that scandal, and the way they did that was by commissioning an independent review. They've now been sitting on a copy of that report for several months now. The public has now seen a leaked copy of it, and we know that that report recommends that they stop the practice of deporting people who've been in the country since they were children. And that's the second government commission report which makes that recommendation. The Shaw Review, published in 2016, updated in 2018, says the exact same thing. So the real question is here, should we be deporting people when the government knows that the rules are wrong, they know that the system needs to be fixed and the rules need to be revisited? And I think if they were really serious about learning the lessons from that scandal, they would not schedule flights like this without publishing that review and implementing the recommendations.
I have to say, it is curious, isn't it, when you consider there are more than 200 nations on this earth, that the first major deportation that I'm aware of, deportation flight, involves Jamaicans, and it immediately evokes the Windrush scandal.
Absolutely. I mean, there have been other smaller charter flights that have over the last few years, but I think it's really significant that this is the second flight since the Windrush scandal, and absolutely nothing has changed legislatively. They haven't implemented anything to say that they have really thought about what caused that scandal and how they're going to ensure that that scandal doesn't happen again. And I think that's the point that we really need to reflect on. You know, no one is condoning criminal activity, but we really need to think about what the government is doing, what they have done, and what they should be doing. And it doesn't make any sense at this point in time for them to schedule this big a flight and to remove so many people.
Except the drugs one is curious, because that does seem, I mean, David Lammy and others are flagging up concerns, because there were originally more than 50 people expected to be deported, and some of the drug offences that we were being told about in the media suggested fairly low-level crime. Nevertheless, I'm not sure you'll find many British-born people who are going to say, yeah, let's let people stay in this country that do manslaughter, rape, when we could deport them.
I think the thing to remember is that these are people who have served their criminal sentences. So they have paid their debt to society. They have been in prison. They've served those sentences. Often they have now spent more time in detention than they did in actual prison. And I think it's really curious that we have this system of double punishment. It effectively is double jeopardy, where we're punishing someone twice for the same crime. And actually, these people are more British than they are foreign. These are people that we went to school with, that we grew up with. They are Brummies, Mancunians, Londoners. They've been here their whole lives. And I really think that the British public believes in second chances and in rehabilitation, and they do not agree with what happened to the Windrush generation. They're waiting for that system reform, and they haven't seen it yet.
Do you find it curious? I mean, there's a part of me which thinks that it's a bit off laying it all on Rolf Harris's shoulders, but he's the one that's been trending on Twitter all day. Here we have a white Australian national, convicted paedophile, and we haven't heard any word on deporting him.
Absolutely. I mean, there is definitely a racialised aspect to the criminal justice system. We know that black people often serve longer sentences than their white counterparts. And we also know that the government is essentially using the immigration system as an extension of that criminal justice system. I mean, I can't comment exactly on Rolf Harris, so I don't know what his citizenship is, but also it's likely that he is still serving his sentence and you can't be deported while you're serving your sentence.
What about Michael Gove, who's admitted to snorting a Class A drug like cocaine, but we're deporting people that have also got drug offences? They've been convicted, but our Brexit minister has actually openly admitted that he's used cocaine.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a double standard.
There is, isn't there?
About who gets what conviction and based on what crime. And as we know, the sort of only qualifying criteria for the cabinet is to have said that you've taken cocaine at the current moment. So
it's a curious world, Minnie, isn't it? It's a curious world indeed. I am intrigued, I have to say, that after the Windrush scandal, which I don't think, even allowing for the fact it was a former administration, Theresa May's administration, I don't think it was handled well. And I just find it curious that it's Jamaicans that are back in the news again, and that sits uncomfortably with me just a little. Minnie, I'm going to love and leave you, if I may, and turn now to Maria Thomas. She's a solicitor at Duncan Lewis. This is a law firm that's represented several of the deportees, and I'm delighted to say that Maria's on the line now. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
What are your concerns about this deportation flight? Massively reduced in terms of its cargo of people by more than half.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if anything, what the litigation from last night shows us is that there were indeed many of these people who have arguable claims to be in the UK, to remain in the UK. The challenge we brought was for no one to be forcibly removed on that plane, pending further investigations and indeed the Windrush lessons learned review that Minnie was talking about. And as I said, I think a number of people were taken off the plane. Some were by court orders. Some were deferred by the Secretary of State herself after we submitted legal representations. And I think that just shows that there were, some of those were drugs offences, as mentioned earlier. Yeah. But it transpires that they are likely victims of trafficking in the county lines context. And again, it just highlights that, yes, there may well be very serious offender on board that plane, and we're not saying we can never deport anyone, but there is a duty on the Home Office to investigate this properly before returning someone.
Is there... I mean, even allowing... This is going to make me sound really bleeding heart here, but even allowing for the fact that someone may not know the country that they originated from because they left it, say, as a 2-year-old, if they commit a heinous crime such as rape or murder, should we as a society care about the fact that they don't know anything about the country we're sending them back to? They have lost the right to remain in the UK because they have behaved appallingly. And why should we behave anything other than appallingly towards them?
Well, I think we've got to ask ourselves the question as to what society are they a product of? And I think precisely in this context, if you have a young child or someone who's even born here, typically a young child coming from here, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, it's a right to take the view that if he or she gets in trouble later, that's not nothing to do with the British society. I just don't think we can say that. I think there are some very serious questions to be answered.
Have we, in this round of deportations, have we removed people from their families? Have we got people sent back to Jamaica who've got children over here, wives, husbands over here?
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't have the full details of the people who were removed. As far as we're aware, and we're trying to establish contact with all our clients who were originally on the flight yesterday, it's our standing that they were all either had their flight, the removal directions deferred in their own right or cancelled in their own right on the basis of their own claims, or alternatively that they were in the Heathrow detention centres and therefore couldn't be removed because of the order. So I don't think any of our clients have actually been deported. But yeah, there will certainly, as we've seen in the media reports, there's lots of people on that flight who had children of their own here who will grow up without their fathers. And
Dear. Maria Thomas, thank you very much for sharing a little about what was going on over the course of the last night. As we heard right at the beginning there, many of those people that were going to be deported were taken off due to concerns that they hadn't been able to access decent legal advice, the kind of legal advice that Maria gives at Duncan Lewis. So there we go. The idea that we've broken up families, it's just... feels... I
We
don't know.
didn't really have time, though. I wanted to know what the attitude of Jamaica is to having these people dumped
It's
on
really
them.
interesting because we've had people that have left this country and been deported to Australia where they've committed heinous crimes against children and they've been sent back here, and then there's been arguments about whether we should take them, and of course so it seems to be it's a global problem. The world is becoming an increasingly nasty place, I fear.